Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School Executive Education. My name is Scott Gardner. We're very excited to have you join us for our new webinar format today. And for our webinar, Leverage Your Values for Better Decision Making with Professor Paul Ingram. Before I introduce Paul, I'd like to go over a few key logistics for the webinar. First, a recording will be made available to you after the webinar. And as always, we encourage you to upload your questions throughout the webinar to the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. And finally, if you'd like to tweet about the webinar, use hashtag CBSExecEd. Paul, it's great to be with you today. Paul Ingram is the Kravis Professor of Business at Columbia Business School. And Paul, shall you take it on?
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
So I'm really happy to talk about this subject of values and decisions because it's been really central to my research and teaching in recent years. And I thought I would begin in describing this work about what for me was the beginning when I kind of discovered my interest in this topic. So for about 10 years or so, I've acted as the faculty director for Columbia's Advanced Management Program. This is a 4-week program on leadership and strategy where senior executives from around the world, public sector, private sector, come to Columbia, New York for a once-in-a-lifetime refresh on these key determinants of their professional success. And there's been a component of that program, actually for some decades now, that we call values coaching. It involves a coach sitting down with the leader and helping her distill her top values and think about how they work in terms of effective leadership. And one of the things that struck me from my very first involvement with the program was that for a lot of the leaders that went through this coaching, the output, what we call a values hierarchy, which is a kind of prioritization of values, was really a powerful tool. Here's one example. This is Joe Almeida. So Joe was part of this program about 10 years ago. And shortly after he finished the program, he got a promotion to be CEO of his company, which was at that time Covidien, a Fortune 500 medical device company. When Joe got the promotion to CEO, the Financial Times interviewed him about his leadership style. One of the questions they asked him was, what did he learn in his month-long retreat for leadership and strategy at the Columbia Business School? When Joe was asked that question, he pulled from his wallet the laminated version of his values hierarchy that he had received from the coaching. And he told the interviewer that that was an important tool for helping him manage himself as a leader and make key decisions. And Joe's example is one of the ones that really grabbed me and got me interested in learning just what this prioritization of values does to help a leader. Some of the research I've done has been looking at how you can use an insight into your values to make better decisions. Rather than tell you about the outcome of that research, I thought I would show you by taking you through a quick version of some of the steps we do with leaders to help them see their values and apply them to decisions, right? So we'll work with your own values and hopefully with one of your decisions and give you some insight to that. So what I'm going to ask you to do now comes from the beginning stages of how we help leaders see their values. So values are your principles of evaluation. They're what determines for you what is good or bad, forward or back, up or down. So without values, you can't decide what is better than what in terms of options, so you can't choose, so you can't act intentionally. Right? So it's really central to our topic. One of the ways we help leaders see their values is we ask them to reflect on important situations. That's what I'm going to ask you to do now. I'm going to ask you to think about a current situation at work that is really important to you. Now, it could be important to other people as well, but the key for us is that it is important to you. And then I'm going to ask you to try and zero in, see if you can use a single word that explains for you why that situation is so important. It may be that the situation represents integrity, or performance, or excellence, or teamwork, or happiness. You'll decide the word that describes the importance, but I want you to be concise and see if you can put a label on what it is that explains the importance of this situation. Now, if the situation is really important, there's probably more than one value at work. So once you've got that first one, I'm going to ask you to go on and try and identify what else explains why this situation is so important. What else? And what else? See if you can come up with 3 or 4 values. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. And if you've got your values, if you happen to have some Post-it notes around, you might write each value on one of the Post-it notes. That'll help you perhaps a little bit when we work with the values later, but if you don't, you'll be able to use scrap paper. So, by now I hope you have 3 or 4 values that for you describe the importance of this key situation. The next step is to prioritize the values. So I'm going to ask you to start by thinking about pairs of values. So for first 2 of the values you identified, ask yourself this question. If you could only have one of those 2 values satisfied, if you had to choose between them, which would you choose? The one that you would choose in that forced choice has a priority above the other in the hierarchy that we're going to build. And you'll do that with every pair of values. Right? So when I did the exercise, these are the values I came up with: motivation, integrity, pride, and excellence. I prioritized them by asking myself, if I had to choose between motivation and integrity, which would I choose? My answer is motivation, so it goes above integrity. This is the order I come up with. And actually, I see excellence at the bottom of my 4. Excellence is actually a really precious thing to me. It's really important. But what this prioritization is saying is not that excellence is less important, but perhaps that it is a means to an end. It's important because it helps me achieve higher order values. Anyway, you'll come up with your own priorities. Put your Post-it notes on the left side of the page, or write your prioritized values on the left side of a piece of paper. We're going to use the rest of the paper to help you analyze a decision. So, once you've got your prioritization, I'm going to ask you to think about a decision, a choice that you're facing that is important to you. It could be at work, it could be personal. The key for us is that it matters. And for the sake of our example, I'm going to ask you to reduce that choice to 2 alternatives. You know, you could take alternative 1 or alternative 2, whatever the most important alternatives are for the choice that you'd like to analyze. You know, so when I was preparing this short talk, I thought about a decision that I'm facing. I've got to make a choice about how I'm going to spend my professional time in the next few months towards a year. And I've got 2 looming projects I have to choose between. One of them, I'm going to call it the nonprofit project, is an opportunity to work with a nonprofit organization that would actually like to use the research I do on values to help their clients make an important kind of life-changing decision in a way that is more effective. So I could work with the nonprofit organization on that. My second option I'm going to call journal. So an academic journal has asked me to be involved in an editorial role, and I could spend time working on that project. You'll choose your own decision and your own alternatives. So when you have them, you'll put them at the top of the page like I have here. And then I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself pursuing the first alternative 1, and then you'll do alternative 2. I'm thinking that I've chosen the nonprofit project, and I'm imagining, kind of forecasting what it'll feel and what it'll be like to work on that project. From that vantage point, I'm going to score my anticipated satisfaction for each of the values I've identified. I'm going to start at the bottom. Right? So for me, that's excellence, but you'll start with your value that came out at the bottom of your prioritization list. Score on a 1 to 7 scale. 7 would mean that you think the value will be completely satisfied if you pursue that alternative. 1 would mean that you foresee the value being violated. So think about the nonprofit project. First, excellence. I feel pretty good, 5 out of 7. I think I'll get my value of excellence modestly satisfied if I do that project. I actually think pride is really going to be completely satisfied. I'm going to be proud working on that important project. Integrity, I also feel very good about. Motivation is perhaps the lowest when I think about the nonprofit project, kind of middling at 4. When I think about the journal, I'm actually concerned about excellence. I've got different ideals and vision and other people involved with the journal. I'm not sure I'm going to feel that really I'm pursuing excellence working on that. Similarly, pride and integrity are middling. I don't really feel motivated when I think about that journal work. Right? So you'll do your own scoring like that. Do it quickly. I think your gut reaction is really what we're looking for here. Once you've done the scoring, I'm going to ask you to think simply which alternative got higher scores. So for me, it's clearly the nonprofit project. If you total the scores of your values between the 2 choices and you see that they're the same, look at the top value and see which one got the highest score in the top value. We find that all of the values you identify in this process matter for making a choice that is good for you, but the ones at the top matter more. And so for me, clearly, it's the nonprofit project, but you'll see which of your own alternatives comes out scoring the highest. So what we find is that this scoring is a great guidepost for you about which of the alternatives you face is going to be most satisfying for you if you were actually to choose it. So some of the research we've done with this method has been with our MBA students at the Columbia Business School, helping them make one of the important choices they make, which is to choose between job alternatives. And we find that one of the biggest predictors about whether they'll like a job that they choose is their scoring of the job, their anticipated scoring of their top values against that job. Right? So we actually teach them to do this kind of analysis when they're choosing jobs. Now they consider other things, the pay, the location, but whether you're getting your values satisfied is really important in determining whether a choice will be good for you. But of course, satisfaction of your values is not the only aspect of good decision making. So let me go on and talk about how you can use your values to leverage another input to effective decision making. What I think about is commitment, implementation. You know, often it seems to me that when you face choices that you could make a success with either of the initial alternatives you face. A lot of what matters is what you do after the initial choice. Follow through, commitment, execution. So this is how you can use values to improve execution and implementation. Take the alternative that scored highest for you. And again, you could get a new piece of paper. You'll prioritize your values as you did before. Put the alternative and the scoring of the values that you had from the previous round of the exercise on the left as I have. Now what you're going to ask yourself is put yourself in the situation. Imagine you're pursuing the alternative. You know, I'm thinking about doing this work on the nonprofit project. And focus on the values that you score the lowest. So for me, the first one is motivation, which was only a 4. And I'm asking myself, why is it that motivation is only a 4? I actually have an answer for that. I think for me, it's that the nonprofit project has a lot of objectives. You know, the nonprofit organization really wants to help their clients make life-changing decisions more effectively. Now that's important to me too. I think that's a great outcome. But I've got other interests. You know, a lot of what motivates me is research. And I know that initially research is not really going to be important to the nonprofit organization. So now I'm going to ask myself, if I was to pursue that nonprofit project, how could I do it in a way that I would feel more motivated? And when I thought about that question, I actually came up with, for me, a good answer. I think I could negotiate, as we were structuring the project and planning data collection and so on, to do it in a way that I could pursue my research interests at the same time the nonprofit gets what they want to help their clients. I think if I did that, I would actually feel even more motivated about this project. So that 4 could go to a 5 or a 6 or a 7. Right? So something I could really do within my control in the implementation to make the pursuit of that alternative more satisfying for me. I came up with something similar for excellence. You know, again, I thought that in the negotiation of the project, if I could do it in a way that would allow me to do excellent research, I would feel better overall about the motivation. So what do we know in our work about how this kind of exercise helps you effectively follow through on your choices? Well, let me give you an example from some work I did recently with a leader at a top hospital. So this leader ran a surgical department, and as part of her work with Columbia, she came up with a strategy to improve the position of her department, which was already really good, but to make it one of the best in the country. And I asked her to do the scoring of her strategy against her own values. And when she did that scoring, she came to a realization. She saw that one of her top values was relationships, and she anticipated that in pursuit of her strategy, she was going to have a conflict with a key relationship, in fact, with her mentor. And she anticipated that that would really be discouraging. You know, imagine if you really care about relationships and you're pursuing a course of action and you run into a conflict in a key relationship, that could cause you to give up. So what did she do? Well, she followed through with the strategy. She didn't change her strategy, but she changed her implementation plan. And she came up with an idea about how she could manage the relationship up front so that she wouldn't have tension with that value as she went forward with the strategy. She did that, and actually it worked beautifully. The strategy was effective, and now her great department has already risen in the national rankings. Right? So thinking about how you feel about your values as you go forward and working that into your implementation plan helps you execute effectively. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is ethics and decisions. And here, I'm going to tell you about an experiment we did. Right? So in this experiment, which we did with real leaders, we had, as you do, two conditions. So what you do in an experiment is you randomly assign people to two conditions. One is a kind of baseline condition, which we call a control condition. In this condition, we asked our subjects to think about some everyday life, nothing to do with values, and then we tested their ethics using a survey instrument which examines whether you will endorse unethical principles in decision making. And then we had an experimental condition. What we did here is we showed the subjects in that group their own values hierarchy that came out of our coaching process. And we asked them just to think about it for 5 minutes, then we tested their ethics. Right? So what did the results show? Well, our measure of ethics actually is an index of whether the decision maker will endorse unethical behavior. Right? So higher scores here are unethical, lower scores are ethical. And we set the control condition to 1, because that's what we're comparing the values condition to. So what we found is that when people think about their own values for 5 minutes before they make a decision, they're less unethical or they're more ethical. So how do we explain that? Well, again, as I said, our values are our insights into what really matters to us in life, in the long term, in the biggest sense. And I think a lot of unethical behavior, not all of it, but a lot of it are bad short-term decisions. You know, there's $50,000 sitting there on the table. It can be tempting to grab it. But if you remind yourself that your long-term value is integrity or legacy, it's easier to resist the temptation and do the right thing. So I think really that our own values are kind of our internal control system. And if they're top of mind, if we cue ourselves to them, they help us do the right thing. So let me summarize what we've talked about. Our research and our work with leaders at the Columbia Business School shows us that your values can be a real tool for helping you make choices that will be satisfying for you, helping you develop implementation plans that will be successful with those choices, and helping you make more ethical decisions. So what do I recommend to you? How do you take these ideas into action in your world? Well, I'd recommend these things. First of all, that you should take the time to identify your very top values. You know, so we did a very short reflection that gave you a taste of what we do to help people see their values. But in our work with executives, we have in-depth coaching and we have other ways of reflection that may take an hour or hours actually. Some people, of course, make it a lifelong pursuit to see their values. But invest to see your very top values clearly. And then keep them accessible. I told you about Joe Almeida carrying around his values on a laminated card. A lot of my former executive students do that. In fact, recently I got a message from a student in London who had had her wallet stolen. And just after she replaced her credit cards, she wrote me and asked to get another copy of the values hierarchy that she carried in the wallet that was so precious to her. So keep them handy to you. When you face hard choices, consider your values. Think about that scoring we did of alternatives against your top values. It's great insight into what choice will be most satisfying for you. When you do choose, include values and in the anticipation of values as you develop your implementation plan. And finally, when you face ethical dilemmas, consult your values, keep them top of mind. They help you to do the right thing. So that's my advice to you on this tool that has been so powerful for us and exciting for so many of the people who have come into contact with it. Now I'm going to invite both Scott to come back and moderate and invite you to ask some questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. A lot of great questions have come in while we're doing, so let's get to a few of those, shall we? First one I'd like to is from Luis. He says, can you explain the role that company values play in decision making? Should company values ever compete with personal values?
I love the question. And there's something I didn't show you about our ethical research, but it turns out, and I think Luis has anticipated it, that company values have rather a mixed and complex effect on ethical decisions. We've got some results that show that when we cue decision makers with their company values, they're actually less ethical. Now, that's not always the case, and what it really comes down to is the resonance and the alignment between an individual's values and the company's values. You know, sometimes the company values people in the company feel they really own, and they're like their own values. In those cases, the company values help people make good decisions and help them to be ethical. But in some circumstances, the company values are rather arbitrary, and perhaps they're developed in a casual way without a lot of participation and consultation from the organization, and they may not really be shared widely in the organization. In those instances, as Luis anticipates, we find that the imposition of these kind of foreign company values cuts the individual off from their own internal control system. So, I'm positive about the company values, but my caution is that they have to be developed in a way that they're real and resonant and aligned with the individual values of the people in the company. Thank you, Luis.
Yes. John asked, how often should value identification exercises be done, and do you find that personal values change over time?
Yeah, this is one of the key questions that I'm wrestling with in the research. Now, my answer, we've got limited research results on this so far because it's something you have to investigate over time. But my answer is that they're pretty stable, and that's reinforced by some of what we've learned in research and also some of the things that the excellent values coaches we've worked with for decades have told us. So they anticipate that our values are usually pretty stable, but they can change if you have a very unusual shock to your life. Right? So not the kind of typical stresses that people face, the difficulties in life, a divorce and things like that, but something really unusual and shocking that kind of knocks you off the course of your life. I'm told that in those circumstances, people really often have a different prioritization of their values. But the basic thing we found is that mostly the values are stable, and in a lot of instances, we have people who've produced their values hierarchy, and a decade or more later, they're still using them to great effect.
Great. Valerie asked, how can we achieve transformational change in the face of conflicting values?
Yes, one of the things that Valerie, I think, puts her finger on it with that question is that a lot of intense conflict, often around organizational change, is over values. Here's something that we've learned in our research, that in fact people do gravitate towards others who share their values. They make decisions like others who share their values, and this is the reason we often have conflicts where values at the heart of it. But we've also found a way to resolve those conflicts. So we've learned that if two people with different values can explain their values to each other, they can actually come to respect each other's attitudes and decisions, and actually they come to like each other much more. So this is one of the beautiful things about values and conflict, even though Valerie's right that they are often driving conflict at the level of, say, attitudes towards a certain program of change. When you see someone else's underlying values, you tend to respect them, and that's what we learn in our research. So our advice in those situations, and actually this goes not just organizational change, but any conflict, is find ways to explain your values to the people you would like to connect with and to relate to, and find ways to learn about their values. One of the advantages of our tool for articulating values is it helps the people who go through it explain their values effectively to the people they need to collaborate with.
I would say that also it's interesting because if you look at intention, that would help people understand each other's values. Most times, maybe even if the values are in a opposition of each other, then the value of intention is similar.
Right. Yes, so I think that that's at the heart of it, that even if somebody is pursuing a course of action that seems not right to you, you understand that it's motivated by an underlying value that you can respect, right, and that closes the gap on conflicts.
Absolutely. All right. Kathy has asked, do you find any pattern in the values that come up the most often, the key drivers for this?
Yeah. That's a question that I really am interested in myself, and I've been doing a lot of research recently. There are some values that come up more often than others. So at this point, we've done, our work with some, a few thousand executives, and I actually have a big database of their values. Some of the ones that are most common are integrity, excellence, happiness is a top value, things like teamwork are top values. So there are some that are kind of loom large. It also differs for groups. So for example, we do work at the Columbia Business School with leaders of nonprofit organizations. They will sometimes have different values than leaders in the private sector. So for example, something like equity might be an important value in that realm, and it could be important in the private sector, but maybe it may not be in the top 10. So we do find a lot of commonality, but there's some differences particularly in sectors, and we find a little bit of differences between nations as well. But one of the refreshing things actually is that there's a lot of commonality as well. And we do find, as I say, that even if you look at a set of values that are different from your own, people can respect them, and they actually grow to like others more when they discover their values.
Have you found that values, where you say they may not change for you over time, have you found that in the history of, like, say, business leaders 30 years ago to business leaders now, different generations, have values changed?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we don't have the data to answer yet. And we're doing some things now to try and expand our work distilling values to people entering the workforce, people who are in college now. And this is one of the things we're fascinated with. You know, I find the values to be quite universal. My suspicion is that we're going to find that, you know, people even across generations are kind of driven by some of the same core things, but I'm sure there's going to be some differences as well.
Exactly. All right. Max has asked, when confronting people of very different values, what is the most effective way to break those barriers so that you can collaborate together and achieve the ultimate goals? Is there a conversation that can be had that's very specific?
Yes. And I think it's a root cause conversation. So imagine that Scott and I are disagreeing about, you know, a program in our organization. If we're at the level of, you know, should we pursue this policy, then it's actually very tough to resolve the conflict. Scott says yes, I say no, where do we go from there? Maybe it's just a matter of power and who's going to be more perhaps destroying in trying to get their way. So we encourage people to get down to the root causes of the conflict. And the root causes, of course, are values. So, you know, in that circumstance, what I would like to do in the conversation with Scott, and I'd like to help him do it with me, is ask him, okay, you like this policy, but why? What does it do for you? Well, you think it leads to growth. Well, why is growth important to you? And to get down with those why, kind of this ladder of inference till we get to the very root cause, which I expect is going to be a value. And I'll try and do the same and articulate the same for Scott as well. And we'll find out that perhaps at the heart of our disagreement are two things we can both respect. You know, I'm motivated by the university's role to generate ideas. He's thinking about service to students. And if we understand that value that may not be our top priority for either of us, but we can essentially respect and reconcile it, get down to those root causes, we find that the opportunities for finding solutions that can satisfy everybody really increase. So climb down that ladder of inference. Why, till you get to the root cause, which is going to be a value.
Great. This is a great question from Sabrina. How do you help leaders, or how do leaders help people in their organization to see their values? Is there a way for them to sort of assist without being influenced?
Yeah, right. And this gets into the process that we use. And I gave you a little bit of a flavor of it, which is helping people reflect on important situations. There's another aspect which turns out helping them prioritize. So those are the two things we do when we help both leaders and companies see their values. Get them to think about what's important to them, what's really good or what's really bad, and then help them do that prioritization that you did very quickly. So we've got a method, a kind of longer version of what we gave you a taste of here that we do with individuals and companies. And actually a lot of leaders have gone through the process that have taken the method back to their companies. So I've got 150 values that we kind of use in our exercises. I've got them on laminated cards. And just yesterday I got an email from a leader in an advertising agency who wanted the set of laminated cards so he could start doing the work with his company. But what you have to do is help people get to the root of why things are important to them, and then you've got to help them see what matters more than what, which is really tough for distilling your top values. Thank you for the question.
Great, that's a great final answer, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in our new webinar format. We encourage you to give us your comments and your feedback, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.